Aryna Sabalenka and Coco Gauff. Aryna Sabalenka's tears did not fade when the cameras cut away because moments like that don't live only on screens. They live in memory. They linger in the silence after applause dies. They echo in locker rooms, in late-night hotel rooms, in the quiet moments between tournaments when the noise finally stops and the weight of expectation becomes impossible to ignore. And long after the ceremony ended and the crowd drifted away, that image followed her, not as a weakness, but as a question mark hanging over one of the most dominant figures the sport had produced in years, because dominance had always been her language, power her identity, intimidation her shield, and yet for the first time the world was forced to reconcile the contrast between the player who shattered opponents with brute force and the human being who stood trembling under the weight of everything that dominance demanded. Because being number one is not a destination, it is a responsibility, a role you never get to step out of, a position where you are no longer chasing dreams but defending them against everyone else's hunger, where every match feels like a referendum on your worth, where every opponent believes your fall would elevate them. And Sabalenka had lived in that space for so long that the tension became invisible to outsiders but relentless on the inside, a slow accumulation of expectations layered on expectations, titles stacked on titles, pressure disguised as privilege. And when she finally cracked, it wasn't because she was weak, it was because she had been strong for too long without relief, because the sport rarely teaches champions how to lose without punishment, how to grieve defeat without judgment, how to sit with disappointment instead of immediately converting it into motivational slogans and promises of redemption. And that is what made the moment so unsettling to watch, because it stripped away the comfort of invincibility and replaced it with something far more confronting: authenticity. And as debates raged about sportsmanship and tone, about what should or shouldn't be said on a podium, a deeper truth emerged beneath the noise: that Sabalenka hadn't disrespected her opponent, she hadn't diminished the achievement across the net, she had simply refused to lie about how much it hurt. And in a culture that celebrates resilience but punishes vulnerability, that honesty felt radical, because we are comfortable with champions who cry after victory, who shed tears of joy, who frame emotion as triumph, but we are far less comfortable when emotion appears in defeat without a neat resolution, without a motivational bow tied around it. And so the world reacted the only way it knew how, by trying to control the narrative, to label her reaction as either admirable or inappropriate, strengths or instability, as if complex human emotion could be reduced to a headline. But Sabalenka did not retreat into silence, nor did she over-explain herself. She simply continued, carrying that moment into the rest of the season like an unspoken companion, every missed shot suddenly interpreted through the lens of fragility, every reaction magnified, every pause scrutinized, until it became clear that the conversation had shifted from what she was doing on court to who she was allowed to be as a champion. And that shift followed her everywhere, because the public rarely lets athletes move on from moments that challenge expectations, especially when those moments disrupt the image they've grown comfortable with. And yet inside that discomfort was growth, because for the first time, Sabalenka wasn't trying to outrun her emotions with power or drown them out with wins. She was acknowledging them, sitting with them, understanding that the fear of losing control had itself become a form of control, shaping how she played, how she reacted, how she carried herself. And by confronting it, she began to loosen its grip, not overnight, not cleanly, but honestly. And honesty in elite sport is rarely linear. It comes in waves, in setbacks, in moments where confidence flickers and then returns stronger for having been tested. And slowly, quietly, the narrative began to change, not because critics apologized or debates vanished, but because Sabalenka kept showing up, kept competing, kept refusing to collapse into the simplified versions others tried to assign her. And that persistence reframed the story, transforming tears from a symbol of failure into evidence of investment, proof that greatness does not immunize you against feeling, it intensifies it. And as younger players watched, as fans reconsidered, as former champions spoke openly about their own breaking points, the sport itself was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality: that the expectation expectation of emotional perfection is unrealistic, that the demand to always be composed often comes at the expense of mental health, that strength and vulnerability are not opposites, but partners. And in that sense, Sabalenka's moment became bigger than tennis. It became a cultural flashpoint, a reminder that resilience is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to move through it without losing yourself. And today, when her name is mentioned, it no longer evokes only power and dominance. It evokes complexity, courage, and a willingness to be seen fully, because legacies are not built solely on titles. They are built on moments that reveal character, and this was one of those moments. The kind that divides opinion but deepens impact. The kind that forces a sport to evolve its understanding of what champions look like, and whether or not she wins another Grand Slam, whether or not she returns to #1, that image of Aryna Sabalenka standing in the aftermath of defeat, eyes wet, voice shaking, refusing to hide, has already etched itself into the history of women's tennis, not as a collapse, but as a turning point, not as a weakness, but as a declaration that even at the highest level, even under the brightest lights, even when the world expects steel, humanity still matters.